Acho que podemos começar. Prazer de fazer a abertura desse evento. Meu nome é Georgia Karopetkov, eu sou gerente de programas e projetos do IDEC, Instituto Brasileiro de Defesa do Consumidor. Eu aqui tenho a honra de iniciar os trabalhos do nosso evento internacional Direito à Saúde e Proteção de Dados Pessoais, Desafios e Potencialidades Contemporâneas. Em nome do IDEC, eu gostaria de iniciar saudando e agradecendo, primeiro, todas as pessoas que estão participando no nosso evento, tanto aqui agora quanto nos próximos dias, aos nossos intérpretes, que não asseguraram a compreensão plena do evento, tanto em português quanto em inglês, a nossa equipe do IDEC, que acreditou na potencialidade dessa interface programática entre saúde e dados pessoais, e graças essencialmente à visão e trabalho dessa equipe multidisciplinar tão talentosa e dedicada nessa construção, estamos aqui hoje, e aos nossos parceiros, apoiadores, South Center, organização fundamental na agenda de saúde global, com que o IDEC tem a alegria e a honra de compartilhar mais uma iniciativa no campo de acesso à saúde, a quem saúdo nas pessoas do professor Dr. Carlos Correia e da doutora Viviana Munhoz, e o Instituto de Comunicação e Informação Científica e Tecnológica em Saúde da Fiocruz, parceiro essencial do IDEC, no avanço da compreensão da crescente digitalização da saúde e na agenda de proteção de dados pessoais, a quem saúda na pessoa do seu diretor, Dr. Rodrigo Murtinho. O IDEC é uma associação de consumidores brasileira, completamente independente de partidos políticos e empresas, com 35 anos de existência, defendendo usuários de serviços públicos e privados e participando das principais discussões, tanto nacionais quanto internacionais, associadas aos direitos econômicos e aos direitos humanos da população brasileira. Hoje, nós atuamos em 7 eixos temáticos principais: saúde, telecomunicações e direitos digitais, consumo sustentável, alimentação saudável e adequada, serviços financeiros, energia e mobilidade urbana. Dentre esses desafios, a crescente digitalização da nossa sociedade oferece ao mesmo tempo grandes oportunidades e grandes preocupações para a saúde. Se por um lado as tecnologias de informação e comunicação possibilitam novas soluções que ampliam o acesso à saúde, otimizando os gastos no setor público e trazendo inovações relevantes, por outro lado, essas mesmas tecnologias possibilitam usos econômicos potencialmente perigosos para os usuários e usuárias, vigilância em massa e apropriação privada de valor de dados pessoais. Casos de vazamento de dados e de ampliação de iniquidades pela digitalização nos levam a questionar esse modelo de sociedade que queremos e qual direção nossos sistemas de saúde devem caminhar. Nos orgulhamos das lutas passadas e presentes pela afirmação do direito à saúde, e reiteramos que essa é a nossa pedra angular e ponto de partida. Nesse sentido, trazemos as seguintes questões. 1. Como alinhar as crescentes inovações em informação, informática e comunicação com a plena realização do direito à saúde em todas as suas dimensões? 2. Quais são os direitos dos Estados, quais são os deveres do Estado nesse contexto? E 3. Para onde devemos olhar como sociedade? Com essas preocupações em mente, o IDEC tem a alegria de dar início a esse evento. Temos segurança de que nossos estimados palestrantes e moderadores, que muito nos honram por terem aceito o nosso convite, serão capazes de jogar luz sobre essas questões. Ao longo dos próximos 3 dias, teremos 3 painéis abordando tópicos fundamentais para a realização do direito à saúde na era digital. Hoje, a mesa de acesso a medicamentos, amanhã, digitalização de serviços de saúde e na quinta-feira, inteligência artificial. Contaremos com 13 panelistas de 3 continentes e de 7 países distintos e certamente concluiremos nossa jornada com mais nitidez sobre as possibilidades e desafios do nosso tempo presente. Sem mais, convido a nossa estimada amiga do South Center, doutora Viviana Munhoz, para dar início aos trabalhos do primeiro painel, reiterando nossos agradecimentos por sua presença e por sua participação. Desejo a todas as pessoas um excelente seminário e que esse seja mais um importante ponto em nossa trajetória de aprendizados e crescimento mútuo. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Georgia. My name is Viviana Munhoz, and I'm the coordinator for the program at the South Center with regards to the issues of public health, technology, intellectual property, and biodiversity. So very happy to be with you today. Bom dia. Thank you so much for the invitation. As South Center, we very much like working and supporting the incredible work that EDEC does, so we're happy to be supporting this initiative. I won't say much of South Center, but just to note that these issues that are being addressed today are very at the heart of what we can call development challenges. And I think this is really what we will be discussing, how with the growing importance of data access, but also regulation, how does this affect development prospects, but also human development, which affects each one of us. So the session today is titled Access to Medicines, Pharmaceutical Sector, and Personal Data Protection. Now, we will be talking about the importance of data, but also how do we develop frameworks for data that support development and equity. And there's many debates in this respect with regards to the role of government and private sector, with regards as well on many choices that are available that may bring different outcomes. But I think I just start out by mentioning that what is already clear is that governments need to craft policies and regulations on data, and they need to be very careful on the choices that are made. So with regards to access to medicines as an essential element of the right to health, data policies and regulations may improve, but they may also hinder access to healthcare services and treatments. Data policies and regulations may also facilitate, but may also hinder collaborative research and development for new medicines, new treatments. And they may also reduce or exacerbate existing health inequities. And they may enhance, but they may also erode the right to privacy in personal health information. So I'm very excited to be listening today to the expert panelists for this session today. We will hear different elements of this essential debate, informed by what is taking place in international discussions, but also on national experiences. So we have 3 speakers for our session today, and we will have time for question and answers. Now, for that, I'd just like to note to the audience that there is the question and answer button on the screen where you can pose the questions. And then we hope that after each speaker has spoken for up to 15 minutes, so we will have a time for those. Our first speaker today will be Ms. Anita Gurumurthy. She's a founder, member, and executive director of IT for Change, a very prominent institution in India, where Anita leads research on the platform economy, data, and artificial intelligence governance, democracy in the digital age, and feminist frameworks on digital justice. Anita is active in engaging in national and international advocacy on digital rights, and she contributes regularly to several academic and media spaces. She is also advisor and an expert on various bodies, including the United Nations Secretary General's member group in support of the Technology Facilitation Mechanism, also in the Paris Peace Forum's working group on algorithmic governance, and in several other, including the Minridu Tech and Policy Laboratories Board, and in the Information and Science Technology for Development Brain Trust of Save the Children. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Anita. Thank you very much. Anita, you have the floor.
Thank you, Viviana, and extremely honored to be here. And I do hope to do some justice to this very, very vast area. Many of my colleagues and I, we've been trying to grapple with this from the perspective of what does right to health data actually translate into from the point of view of the global South. So there's much being done in the context of health data regulation, which is not surprising at all. considering that the pandemic only gave a boost to different aspects of the data marketplace. Obviously, the pandemic led to an increasing and intensifying platformization of society, and it has also led to the possibilities for better decision-making using algorithms, which of course was quite evident in the way in which many of our governments used surveillance apps. However, the fact remains that through genetics and through machine learning techniques, there is a possibility to really beef up and strengthen public health delivery. And it is this promise that continues to drive the idea of health data regulation. The primary motivation, though, is really coming from making the marketplace ready by resolving the tension between sensitive personal information and the huge market value of data. So the impetus for regulating health data is actually coming from the enormous market value of data in general, not just health data, and I'll come to that in a minute. For instance, in India, we have the proposed health data management policy, which is still under deliberation. But if you look at one jurisdiction that has really done a lot of work in this area, that is the European Union. Of course, everybody knows of the European General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR. But building on the GDPR, we now have the whole idea of the European health data space. The European health data space draws from the common data space policy framework and vision of the European Union, which is that you will have the ability to have sector-specific data policies, but also a data space that will allow you to actually use a lot of webbed mixed data sets. So yes, personal and sensitive personal information becomes very important for health research and perhaps health delivery as well. But if you actually combine this with, let us say, transportation data or data of cities, then you might have some complex data sets that would allow you to get into the realm of innovation. So this European health data space, which is the first of the sectoral data policy and regulation, aims to provide healthcare and treatment and provide data for the management of healthcare systems and services. It is also geared to contribute to a single market for digital health products and services in the entire European Union. And this is based on the utilization and exchange of electronic health data, and it hopes to use formats that are interoperable and use other complementary data sets in order to make some kind of dent in innovation. There's one more legislation that I would like to speak to, which just got promulgated and it got politically frozen just in April 2022, which is the Digital Services Act, which has a very interesting kind of regulatory protection for consumers, particularly with the rule that very large platforms have to start now identifying, analyzing, and assessing at least once in a year the systemic risks that come out of their functioning, especially in the delivery of services, including health services. So this is a very important rule from the Data Protection Authority through the Digital Services Act, which is basically to curtail any potential or foreseeable negative effect that comes in the realm of public health by forcing or mandating platforms to take care of their self-assessment and risk assessment. What is very significant here is the example of China, and I'd like to point out to how China uses a combination of data security and cybersecurity with a personal information protection legislation in 2021, which looks at how digital health can be protected. And the approach that China takes is to regulate foreign entities very, very strictly in the collection of health data of its citizens. I think this becomes extremely important also in the context of many bilateral and other plurilateral free trade agreements through which many countries of the global south in their digital services clauses lose health data of their citizens because they do not have such protections in their cybersecurity legislation. So this is something to be noted. The second point I'd like to point out is that the whole idea of concerns around health data arise on account of the fact that accessibility rules today are not differentiated. So I'd like to, at the end of my talk, put into the chat a paper that we have done at IT for Change, and this argues for the need for differential rights for the different seekers of data. What I mean to say is that we should actually have an approach whereby public uses of data, altruistic uses of data are governed very differently from private uses of data. And currently, we really don't have regulation address this imperative at all. And what is really extremely worrisome is secondary uses of data become and downstream uses of data become extremely problematic to govern, because even if you have taken consent from source communities, for instance, using, let us say, a comparable approach to the Nagoya Protocol, where communities are placed at the center and source communities' consent has been obtained, what really happens is multiple mixed data sets implicate very, very different communities in downstream uses, to the extent that it is simply impossible to fix how claims of communities will be implicated in data uses and data reuses. So this is something that jurisdictions will have to grapple with. The concerns are also about mobile-based health apps, about which I think this audience knows very well. And this is a concern that has been flagged also by the Federal Trade Commission in the US, where health apps have been brought to question and breaches have really been examined. But this is not really quite the case in the Global South. The increasing risks in the Global South are also because many of these health apps in countries like India, where there is no personal data protection regulation, for instance, the Flow app, which is a menstrual app that we have researched, freely takes away data of subjects, who believe that this data is not going to be abused. But what is really the truth is that privacy activists have pointed out to how many of these apps behave very differently in European jurisdictions and actually are very extractivist in jurisdictions of the Global South, which don't have privacy regulation. Do I have 5 more minutes? Because I would just like to check the time.
Sure. Go ahead, Anita.
All right. So to then come to this, one more very important area of benefits, what we need to really also understand is, other than extractivism, is the issue of diversity of data sets, on top of which AI models are built for diagnostics, therapeutics, and precision medicine. What is very true today is that by and large, much of the data upon which AI modeling is done is data that is based on the global north and particularly modeled on Caucasian populations. This is really extremely dangerous because therapeutics targeted at other kinds of racial populations, really, and ethnic populations, then really bring in a built-in bias, and there is absolutely no regulation, because AI regulation, except in China, and for the reason that in the Chinese case, health data regulation intersects with cybersecurity regulation, you're not really able to do very much about pharma companies or laboratories operating in countries like India and the data that they actually use through machine learning models to actually do diagnosis and therapeutics. So this is an unregulated field. My last point is about public health provisioning and access to benefits. I would like to point out that we really have to be extremely cautious in the way big pharma and big tech are colluding. And since the pandemic, we really see like intensification of advertisements, and these advertisements have really become extremely important to companies like Facebook, where pharmaceutical companies looking to sell drugs to potential patients collude with companies like Facebook and Google. And they are actually able to misuse data collection. And this is, for instance, a drug manufactured by GlaxoSmithKline, for example, is prescribed to treat advanced ovarian cancer, and the drug was targeted at users who Facebook determined had shown an interest in cancer awareness. So the drug is being sold to people sidestepping, the medical professionals and public health concerns. So the emphasis on personal precision healthcare at the cost of public health imperatives does not have to be a zero-sum game. What we really need to do is put in place data accessibility regimes that are geared for public health equity. What it means is countries like Germany have required insurance providers to transfer anonymized health data of millions of people to public institutions for research under the 2020 Patient Data Protection Act. What this simply means is if public health systems are providing services to citizens, then insurance companies that are actually covering these citizens have every business to share data with public health, anonymized data with public health institutions. And this kind of regulation is vital for Global South, where in a country like mine, much of the biobank data is controlled by the Apollo group, for instance. And Indian public health services are really in the doldrums. And many of the poor people actually go into these private hospitals, and all their data through consent mechanisms, which are pseudo consent mechanisms, are collected actually by private hospitals. And private hospitals now, we believe, need to be mandated to share back data with governance systems. And without granular rules, and without addressing concerns of explainability and interpretability in AI models, it's really not possible to bring access to benefits to the populations of the Global South. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. You spoke at the good rhythm for translation, and I think we're well on time. So that was really wonderful. Anita, following your presentation, we have a first question in the Q&A. So before I take that up, I'd just like to note again to our participants that there is the Q&A function below. So please do feel free now to add your questions there. If you have any for Anita, or if later on you have for the other participants, we'll take them up based on what we see posted. And second reminder is just to note that there is translation. So we have translation for Portuguese, English, English, Portuguese. So if you'd like to listen in the language that the speaker is speaking on, you have to make no change. But if you would like to change to the other language, then you go into the translation button and then you change into the language you see of the booth, either English or Portuguese. So we hope that everyone is able to follow so far. So with that, I'll take the first question. It is on our Q&A, and Anita, this refers. I would generally say this is about, to what extent should we have harmonization on some of the areas of law that you were mentioning, for example, with regards to the need to regulate how we address personal sensitive information. If you'd like to answer, thank you.
Yes, I was muted. Thank you. I think that there is a very, very important role for harmonization and also for the WHO. In June 2021, the WHO came out with a report with 6 guiding principles for regulation of artificial intelligence. However, I think the current international political economy, particularly, what we see in the US with respect to a rollback or a risk to rollback of abortion rights, or for instance, globally with respect to what has happened to the vaccine politics, leaves us with very little hope about this kind of a concerted regime for harmonization, and the credibility in terms of the WHO's own ability to act, as a space for institutional rules that can harmonize global institutional frameworks. I think that really is in question. But I think it's very important for countries like the G77 to raise their voice and to be able to introduce, especially in the realm of health, certain rules that will require public access to data, accessibility rules, anonymization rules, which can look at both civil political rights of health data subjects, as well as the duty to care of custodians of data. So that is very important from a human rights point of view, but from an economic justice point of view, I think it's vital that the ability of countries which have innovation possibilities in the global south is not eroded or hollowed out by big pharma originating in the global north. So I think there is a very important role for this kind of harmonized, rule-based international system.
Thank you, Anita. At the same time, you were mentioning that important element of the need to keep that space for developing countries at this point in time to experiment with some policies, in particular, for example, in the area of artificial intelligence, where we're still trying to see, how will this develop in a lot of our industries, and how government can make use on this, and then how that affects also users. So you gave some examples from situations in India on progress. Do you think that we still need that experimentation space, or you were drawing in some areas, China has already done some activities. Do you think that sharing, for example, more between what South is doing in a South-South framework would be helpful?
Certainly, I think these are indeed in the realm of possibility. However, I think that it is vital for public data infrastructural policies, not just in health, but also, let's say, in the area of agriculture data, in the area of, enormous amounts of legacy data sets that reside in our countries, for instance, on soil or satellite data, weather data. All of this become extremely crucial. I'm very fond of giving an example that some of you may have heard already, which is that one important research in East Asia found that there is a direct correlation between public transportation and cardiovascular health. And the country was able to do this research because they actually had data sets. And imagine if we could take transportation data and mandate that certain amounts of inferential data from our cities should be shared by Uber and Ola with our public health institutions. We could also possibly combine these data sets to produce insights for public policy. So I think gearing up to regulate data for generating public value is very important through the creation of policies for and infrastructures for public data sets. And that, I think, is something that we should look at and tie in with the whole question of global public finance and ODA responsibilities. So it from intellectual property rights to public finance, this is a very, very important question, I think, for international political economy. Only then will countries of the global south be able to come together to invest in research areas such as, what matters to us, not just illnesses. I mean, not to really undermine any disease, but to say that prioritization for, let's say, malaria or other endemic diseases in the global south would be possible only with the creation of these public data infrastructures and appropriate governance regimes for these public data infrastructures.
Thanks, Anita. There's another example right now in the debates ongoing debates with regards to the World Health Organization, with regards to, facilitating information with regards to potential pathogens of pandemic potential, and, again, the issue about how do we regulate access, and then sharing between how we can use the data, but then understanding also the inequities about, capacities to make effective use. So related to what you were mentioning prior, there is a follow-up question with regards to, how doable do you think that harmonization of some of these aspects of law, how far is this something that could actually take place when there are such different frameworks among countries and perhaps priorities? Perhaps just to narrow down that very big question, which you have answered in a way already about the importance to working towards that. Are there specific areas that you could prioritize and say, here is where we need harmonization? I think you said that already, but just because it's such an important point, if you could highlight again, where do you think that we need to prioritize harmonization? We know WTO efforts have some area, for example, cross-border access to data, and not necessarily the way Perhaps all countries would like that to go, but could you mention, please, again, some examples of what is doable and what would be priorities for that harmonization? Thanks.
I think that a low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, is certainly the role of artificial intelligence, because there is considerable consensus, I think, about what is not desirable. I mean, it's certainly not desirable in the name of innovation and precision medicine to have models built on, a completely different racial profile of research subjects, and applying. So I think in the area of what is a malpractice, what is unethical, what is abusive, there is a considerable consensus. And I would say that the need here is for us to understand that citizens of the global south are not secondary, right? So that is just the push. And so I would really think that the global policy community, particularly, for instance, the South Center, along with the WHO, can push for that, and these have to be binding. The Secretary General has announced our common agenda and the Summit of the Future. So AI regulation is very much around the corner. And of course, we all know that there will be a kind of a slide towards the lowest common denominator. However, we do need to fight for this. I think the bigger battle, which is also important, is to say that regardless of inferential data and how they are, intelligence and insight is regulated, a certain layer of raw data, or a data that is broadly, the commons of raw data, should actually be made public. And this should be respected globally, because we can talk about these data trusts and voluntary data sharing, also many stewardship initiatives where people contribute to data pools. But I think these efforts don't really add up, because they are boutique efforts. And what we really need are large data sets which can benefit public health and equity. And therefore, I think some kind of a data commons approach, which distinguishes, the generation of certain raw data, which should really be shared back with communities, with oversight of communities in the regulation, participation of communities in the data use rules, data accessibility rules for data seekers, differential accessibility rules for different data users. By that, I mean pharmas and other, even altruistic, let's say, cooperatives, for instance, innovation cooperatives or collaboratives. I think these are the areas where we really need to make some progress. I'm sorry, I'm talking about a wish list, but still.
Thank you so much, Anita. There was another comment, just to note, of someone asking, I think this would be of general interest, if you do have some links of some of the legislations you were mentioning, if you'd like to share. Some participants think that would be useful. So maybe our EDIC facilitators can bear that in mind and maybe share later to those who have attended. So I'd like now to turn to another of our panelists, and Anita, we will have time. I hope that we can come back all together, because some questions may be general for all our panelists to reflect upon. And after having heard you, I'm sure Joyce and Anila will also have thoughts to share. So I'd like now to turn the floor to Joyce Souza. She is a journalist, a social scientist. She holds a doctorate on human and social sciences from the Universidade Federal do EPC, and she's a researcher of the Laboratory of Free Technologies, that's Lab Libre of the UFABC. She focuses her work on the social impact of applying digital technologies in the area of public health, both in private and public sector, in the context of Brazil. And she's co-organized several books, including with regards to the colonialism of data and how this operates, in particular with regards to algorithms, and another book titled very provocatively, The Society of Control, the Manipulation and Modulation of the Digital Networks. So I hope my translation was not too bad from that Portuguese text. Joyce, thank you very much. Please, you have the floor. Joyce, please go ahead. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Viviana. Eu quero agradecer o convite, especialmente ao IDEC, que tem proposto excelentes reflexões e trabalhos no Brasil, visando a proteção de dados do cidadão brasileiro e o acesso à saúde. Mas quero também cumprimentar as integrantes da mesa, dizer que para mim é sempre um prazer e um aprendizado ouvir as diferentes reflexões e perspectivas de construção acerca do tema que a gente está aqui debatendo hoje, que é o acesso à saúde e também a proteção de dados e como tudo isso hoje está implicado junto ao uso de novas tecnologias digitais. Eu tenho pesquisado sobre privacidade, vigilância, controle e as implicações de uso das tecnologias digitais na área da saúde nos últimos 6 anos e especificamente entre os anos de 2016 e 2018, eu pesquisei para a minha dissertação de mestrado o mercado de dados pessoais na área da saúde pública e privada no Brasil, olhando especificamente para um município localizado no estado de São Paulo, que é um município que tem um dos maiores IDHs, que é o Índice de Desenvolvimento Econômico do Brasil, que é o município de São Caetano do Sul. Olhando para esse mercado de dados, a minha pesquisa é aberta, então quem tiver interesse, fique à vontade para buscar essa pesquisa dentro da biblioteca da Universidade Federal do ABC e analisar melhor como ela foi desenvolvida, visto que aqui eu vou ter 15 minutos, então vai ficar bastante restrito o que eu vou apresentar, mas estou à disposição para conversarmos depois, quem tiver interesse. E pensando um pouquinho essa perspectiva do mercado de dados, dentro da minha pesquisa, eu me deparei com uma questão crucial no âmbito da privacidade, que eram as farmácias. O quanto as farmácias, elas já coletavam os dados, claro, devido à natureza de suas atividades e também à necessidade de controle que é exigida pelo Ministério da Saúde no Brasil, no que tange ao acesso a determinados medicamentos, porém, com o avanço das tecnologias digitais, as farmácias passam a potencializar o acesso à coleta e à classificação de dados pessoais de cidadãos brasileiros. E como isso se deu e tem se dado, porque ainda é presente essa estrutura? Através de parcerias e convênios com seguradoras e operadoras de planos de saúde privados no Brasil e empresas que oferecem o benefício de descontos em farmácias aos seus funcionários. Ao longo da minha pesquisa, eu fiz uma pesquisa de campo com entrevistas em relação a pessoas que atuavam e atuam internamente dentro dessas estruturas e tive acesso a estes convênios. E estes convênios, muitas vezes, eles se davam da seguinte forma: o consumidor, o cidadão brasileiro, ao adentrar a uma farmácia, ele disponibilizava todos os seus dados que eu quero dizer são dados pessoais e também sensíveis, porque estão atrelados a condições de saúde, para adquirir esses descontos que permitiam que ele adquirisse um medicamento com um custo muitas vezes bastante inferior ao que era ofertado na prateleira. Estes descontos chegavam de 30% a 70% na ocasião. Entre os dados, o cidadão brasileiro disponibilizava o seu CPF, o número do seu plano de saúde, caso esse convênio estivesse atrelado a uma seguradora ou a uma operadora de saúde, ou também o seu dado atrelado à empresa, caso fosse um benefício oferecido pela empresa da qual ele era funcionário. Esses dados, eles eram coletados, classificados e enviados para estes convênios e também para estas empresas, com todos os dados da pessoa atrelado também ao medicamento adquirido, ao preço pago, e também a forma de pagamento, se isso havia sido feito com cartão de crédito, com cartão de débito ou de outra forma. Com base nisso, existia claramente um descontrole da privacidade do cidadão quanto ao dado fornecido e também um não consentimento no que tangia a classificação desses dados, a utilização desses dados, visto que o cidadão não tem conhecimento de como esse dado é utilizado, a quem ele é repassado, a como ele é repassado. E pensando um pouco mais nessas estruturas, o âmbito das grandes corporações de farmácia no Brasil utilizam diversos aplicativos, plataformas digitais também para comercialização de seus produtos, atreladas também aos descontos. Essas plataformas são desenvolvidas por empresas terceiras, na maioria das vezes, empresas voltadas à tecnologia da informação, das quais também passam, de alguma forma, a ter acesso e guarda desses dados. Isso mostra que existe um mercado da coleta desses dados e do acesso a esses dados, dos quais nós não temos mapeado no Brasil, dos quais não existe, na verdade, uma opacidade em relação aos atores que estão envolvidos em todos esses processos. Aonde estão os dados? É uma pergunta que ninguém sabe. De que forma eles são armazenados? Quais são os sistemas de segurança que permitem determinados acessos ou não, se há processos de anonimização desses dados coletados ou não, e mais, por que a farmácia precisa coletar tantos dados? Esses dados são disponibilizados, por que eles precisam ser disponibilizados? Quais as implicações em relação a isso? E esse processo, do qual a gente poderia chamar de dataficação, ele passa a ser uma mercantilização e um dos princípios do neoliberalismo dentro das estruturas capitalistas do Estado. Os dados, eles são recursos que estão sendo transformados em mercadorias pelo processamento de algoritmos. A ideologia do neoliberalismo, ela defende essa arquitetura na nossa sociedade como uma forma de conectividade e é uma arquitetura que não deixa espaço para debates e valores públicos. A Anita coloca a importância desse debate público, desse debate baseado no valor público na fala dela, e é o que esse neoliberalismo baseado nessa dataficação como uma ideologia tira de nós, enquanto sociedade civil, a possibilidade desse debate. E, consequentemente, é uma ausência de valores do espaço público, dos debates públicos, que faz com que essa arquitetura entre em choque com esses sistemas. Então, pensar essa perspectiva dos dados, pensar na possibilidade de regulamentação, coloca entraves, mas muitas vezes não resolve essa ideologia da dataficação. E um dos exemplos em relação a isso é que, ao longo do desenvolvimento da minha pesquisa, nós não tínhamos ainda aprovado no Brasil a Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, o que poderia nos colocar em xeque. Isso ainda acontecia porque não existia a lei que regulamentava a proteção a esses dados, como esses dados poderiam ser transacionados ou repassados de um mercado ao outro, como ele poderia ser feito ou não, a segurança desses dados. Mas o que nós vemos é que a Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados brasileira, ela colocou sim entraves, mas ela não resolveu ainda este problema, visto que recentemente as farmácias ampliaram ainda mais as coletas delas, passando a ter coletas biométricas, que foram suspensas, mas essas coletas biométricas estavam atreladas também a descontos e ao acesso num valor bem inferior aos medicamentos, o que muitas vezes coloca em xeque qual o poder de consentimento do cidadão brasileiro, frente que o cidadão brasileiro tem um salário mínimo muito precário, perto das estruturas necessárias para a sua vida, e qualquer desconto passa a ser um impacto muito grande para que ele tenha o consentimento de negar ou não a opção de dar ou não os dados. Essas são algumas implicações que nós vemos ao analisarmos esse contexto. E pensando um pouco nessa ideologia neoliberal, que ela avança também hoje dentro da política econômica e a política social brasileira, nós temos no Brasil um plano que se chama Estratégia de Saúde Digital para o Brasil de 2020 a 2028. E eu chamo atenção para esse documento na minha fala, principalmente ao capítulo 7, denominado Ecossistema de Inovação. Há um item nesse ecossistema de inovação, que é o item 7.3, em que o governo brasileiro discorre sobre saúde baseada em valor. E ao ler este capítulo, nós identificamos que não é a saúde baseada em valor público, em valor de direitos humanos, em valor que a Constituição brasileira nos garantiria o acesso à saúde como um direito humano, como um direito universal. Não, esse valor utilizado no documento diz no item 7.3.1, explorar modelos de valor em saúde, significa explorar modelos de valor para o capital na saúde. E dentro deste item, há a questão da interoperabilidade da coleta de informações para inovações tecnológicas, modelos de remuneração alternativos, criação e incorporação de tecnologias ao ambiente de interconectividade em saúde, que deveria, segundo este documento, formar um ecossistema de inovação que deve, inclusive, incluir a saúde suplementar brasileira. O que seria a saúde suplementar brasileira? Os planos de saúde privados que teriam acesso a toda essa base de dados, inclusive a base de dados do Ministério da Saúde e do SUS, que é o Sistema Único de Saúde, que é o maior sistema de saúde do mundo, né, de saúde pública do mundo. Imagina a quantidade de dados que esse sistema hoje detém, visto que ele atende cerca de 3/4, se eu não me engano, da população brasileira. A grande massa da população brasileira é atendida pelo Sistema Único de Saúde. Dentro dessa perspectiva, há também, dentro deste documento, no item 7.2.1, o desenvolvimento de iniciativas de inteligência artificial, Big Data e o uso secundário dos dados, do qual eles reforçam que o ecossistema de inovação deverá funcionar como um catalisador de iniciativas inclusivas do setor público e privado voltados à utilização dos dados em saúde e de dispositivos inteligentes. E aqui o que isso menciona? Dispositivos inteligentes, as inúmeras plataformas que poderão vir a coletar dados para a utilização do desenvolvimento de mercados da área da saúde e também no desenvolvimento de políticas públicas de saúde. E aí nós precisamos pensar qual seria a posição da sociedade civil, que pouco no Brasil tem sentado à mesa para debater um tema tão caro para a sociedade. Quais são as possibilidades que a sociedade civil tem de debater estas questões e de colocar e compreender melhor o que está sendo planejado para o Brasil no âmbito do acesso aos dados pessoais, no âmbito da privacidade desses acessos e mais no âmbito do desenvolvimento de novas tecnologias, como a inteligência artificial, que necessariamente precisa da coleta massiva de dados para se desenvolver. E qual o custo que isso pode ter para a sociedade? Por exemplo, a utilização de dados de saúde de forma discriminatória, que isso já ocorrem relatos deste uso, ainda que não fiscalizados e não utilizados como forma de impulsionar uma conscientização da sociedade brasileira no âmbito dos impactos que esse acesso aos dados pode trazer. Com isso eu encerro minha fala, mas continuo aqui à disposição para conversarmos.
Thank you very much, Joyce. So there are a couple of questions. Let me start with the first one. The first one well, first of all, there's a lot of congratulations for the study that you've presented and a lot of interest in accessing the document. So there are requests, if it's possible, if you can add the link to your study or how to find it in so that participants might access that. As well as if you do have the document of the government of Brazil about strategies for digital health that you mentioned. So the first question I'd like to pose to you is with regards to what you were mentioning of the prejudicial use and the ideology that you mentioned, what do you think could be done to neutralize this? And in your opinion, which public authorities should be regulating this market? And is there room for health entities as well, such as drug agencies, to be involved in such regulation? So Joyce, if we can take this question first, then we can move to another. If you'd like me to repeat, please do let me know.
Oh, perfect, Viviana. Eu disponibilizo para vocês os links, tanto do acesso à minha pesquisa, quanto desse documento, que é um documento público brasileiro. Posso ver também com o pessoal da organização do evento para disponibilizar via e-mail, talvez seja mais fácil, mas também por uma simples busca em alguma das plataformas de busca, vocês podem chegar a esses documentos. Em relação ao que as autoridades públicas poderiam fazer, eu acredito que as regulamentações, a Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, ela coloca, sim, muitos entraves nesses acessos, tanto que ampliou o debate sobre isso, isso também foi fundamental. A sociedade brasileira debate muito pouco o conceito da privacidade, entende o conceito da privacidade de uma forma muitas vezes simples, não agregando valor às implicações que a falta de privacidade pode trazer. Então, o debate todo e a construção da Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, ela trouxe, sim, uma forma de conscientização e reflexão, então ela traz entraves. Existem algumas iniciativas de regulamentação, por exemplo, recentemente está ocorrendo um debate no Senado sobre a regulamentação do desenvolvimento de inteligência artificial no Brasil, mas aqui eu quero ressaltar uma crítica que ainda não há uma pluralidade nos representantes dessa comissão para debater a questão do avanço da inteligência artificial no Brasil. E o que eu quero dizer sobre a composição do grupo que está debatendo a pluralidade? Então, eu quero dizer a pluralidade de gênero, mas também de raça, né? Acredito que isso seja fundamental para que a sociedade civil esteja bem representada nesses espaços de debate. Então, avançar em relação a isso é um ponto. Agora, debater a questão da ideologia do neoliberalismo é algo bastante amplo e que requer um avanço muito grande quanto sociedade, pensando na perspectiva de qual construção social nós queremos desenvolver. Se nós queremos avançar nessa perspectiva do neoliberalismo e da dataficação, de que os dados, por exemplo, resolveriam a tudo, então por isso nós temos que coletar estes dados, principalmente num avanço de mercado, e aqui nós estamos falando especificamente do mercado da saúde, ou se nós queremos dar um passo atrás e repensar que modelo é esse que está sendo desenvolvido não somente no Brasil, claro, mas pensando especificamente no Brasil, que é meu objeto de estudo. E em relação às organizações, o IDEC tem feito um trabalho precioso em relação a isso, né? Então, as organizações têm avançado, têm monitorado, têm feito uma defesa em relação ao cidadão, e acredito que esse é um caminho que nós precisamos nos unir em diferentes frentes para debater, não só nos espaços públicos em relação a políticas e desenvolvimento de regulamentações, mas também nos espaços quanto conscientização e desenvolvimento de pensamentos sobre vigilância, controle, privacidade e acesso aos dados na área da saúde, junto à sociedade civil.
Thank you, Joyce. As you speak, that's incited several other questions. So one of them is with regards to the general data protection law in Brazil, which you mentioned, and two related questions. One is, to what extent do you think that this data protection law can be used, if at all, to regulate the amount of data that the pharmaceutical sector can collect, or players in the pharmaceutical sector? And secondly, do you think that this new law was not enough to tackle this issue of datification? What do you think was missing? Back to you.
Em relação à Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, ela ser... Vocês me escutam?
Sim.
Ok. Em relação à Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, ela, na minha interpretação, há um ponto dela, da qual traz implicações em relação a essa coleta de dados, que é a questão do consentimento, que tem sido muito utilizado dentro deste mercado. Então, o poder de consentimento, eu informo o cidadão de que aquilo vai ser, de que determinado dado será coletado, será utilizado, ele consente com aquilo, porque essa questão do consentimento, ela gera inúmeros debates importantíssimos, né? Então, como eu coloquei, dentro de uma população onde um salário mínimo ele é extremamente baixo para a condição necessária de vida dentro do país, você ter descontos no acesso ao medicamento que variam de 30% a 70%, qual é a possibilidade de consentimento? Mas ele assina um termo dizendo que ele tem consentimento sobre aquela coleta de dados, sobre o uso de dados, e a empresa, de alguma forma, se blinda em relação a isso. Essa é algo a ser debatido e refletido em relação à Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados brasileira. E outra questão, pensando na coleta e no acesso público dos dados, isso também é uma questão quando a gente pensa num avanço do autoritarismo no mundo, não só no Brasil. Quando você tem governos autoritários se formando e se consolidando nos espaços, os acessos aos dados também passam a ser um risco. Por isso, precisamos debater, enquanto sociedade civil, quais serão esses acessos. E aqui eu não estou dizendo que não existe a importância do acesso a dados de saúde para o desenvolvimento de políticas públicas. Esse acesso ele é importantíssimo, ele não ocorre somente por conta do avanço das tecnologias digitais. As tecnologias digitais passaram a ser mediadoras e potenciais mediadoras para que esses acessos se ampliassem e fossem feitos numa escala muito maior do que ocorreu anteriormente, porém, há muitas décadas, esses dados são fundamentais para o avanço de determinados setores da área da saúde, inclusive no avanço da ciência. Então, não estou aqui dizendo, não temos que ter acesso, mas estou colocando questões em relação a quais são esses acessos, qual a segurança e qual a garantia do cidadão brasileiro, que essa garantia ela ainda não está completamente dada pela Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, inclusive porque a gente ainda não tem jurisprudência que nos garantam que determinadas fiscalizações vão avançar e vão ser realizadas e vão tramitar durante todo o processo judiciário e vão ter punições, por exemplo, ou vão ter resultantes a favor do cidadão brasileiro. Nós ainda não temos essas jurisprudências que nos garantam isso, e a Agência Nacional, que vai regulamentar tudo isso no Brasil, ainda tem feito poucas colocações em relação a determinados temas, por exemplo, a coleta biométrica nas farmácias. Foi muito debatido dentro da mídia brasileira, dentro de alguns espaços, mas muito pouco oficialmente pela Agência Nacional.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I'd like to just mention to participants that there are also many comments that might be of interest for your reading in the Q&A section, so you may also follow. Now we will go on to our third presenter just to make sure that we have enough time to also hear from her, and then we can come back with all of our panelists for a last discussion if time allows.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joyce. So I'd like to now present Angela Costa, who is a professor of pharmaceutical sciences at the university in the city of Cali, Colombia, the University of Cali, and she is a doctorate in management and biochemistry. So thank you very much, Angela, for being with us, and you have the floor. We can see you.
Thank you so much, Viviana. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to share with you some of my previous work in main regulatory agencies, in many health minister sectors in the South American countries, and I'm so sorry because I have previous some technical problems here in the university, but okay, I will try to do my best. Did you hear me? It's everything okay with my sound transmission?
Your sound is very clear, Angela, at least for me.
Okay. So I will go here. I will share my I guess that I don't have permission to share my screen. Okay, ready. So here. Okay, so well, I will share with you as the panel focus on the current challenges and perhaps potentials in the right to health and data protection. I will focus on pharmaceutical sector and personal data protection. First of all, it's important to mention that in our region, in Latin America region, we are crossing the same challenges that global context are alerting for us, and it is related with this issue. CEPAL it's a regional instance that perhaps is one of the most important regional instances that we have here for our countries. Just to keep in mind the main concerns of our region in the social and economical environment. And from this perspective, they also bring too many inputs to our countries. And this is one of the last inputs that they published in 2018. And it stated that in 2020, health, manufacturing, agriculture, mining, transport, and energy sectors will be the most affected by the greater digitalization of their activities. So here we have as it is stated here, health sector is one of the most affected sectors from these involving issues that we have in the global context. We have here in this figure, we can check the participation of the health connectivity in these big sectors. We can check here in this figure that health sector has one of the most great and bigger participation in the connectivity, and how this new technological devices, these new applications has involved so much in health sector. It is evident, and I guess that you have an interesting discussion with the other panelists here, as the entrance of many health medical devices, but not only the entrance of this kind of intervention in the health sector. We have now a great variety of electronic devices, and the most practical example is our cells, and how they provide many different ways to try to follow our health status, health condition. But with this, the main concern, and it is the principal objective and scope of this presentation, is to reflect about this new environment and the scarcity that we have in different sectors. I am talking about, for example, in the regulation of health issues, in the surveillance, sanitary and also epidemiology surveillance. So from this sanitary perspective, I will share with you some main concerns that I guess that they don't have concrete actions and concrete answers from the global context, and also from other regional context. We have two great challenges in this new scenario. So as you know, these new ways of trying to follow our health condition brings too many options for any person that for example, in Australia we have now some mobile applications that provides the health sector, the health ministry and the health authorities there in Australia to try to follow all the main health conditions of the whole population in Australia. But the question about this is how this information is managed now, how this information have all the security, cyber security and ethical protection for every one of us, in this case for every Australian citizen. These are questions that we don't have really answers, and for example in Australia they are debating now this kind of scenario, that it is so useful, for example, to have these mobile applications, but at the same time there are many concerns about ethical issues, ethical concerns. And I guess that it is interesting to have a look for 2 decades or 3 decades ago. I will share with you some previous concerns of our patient information management of this data, and how there are other concerns that still now they don't have answers, as well as these data patient protection concerns that we have now. And I will share with you some of the main issues that we developed with the clinical research, and how they also are, they have bias to bring safety and efficacy outcomes of our main medicines, conventional medicines, but also for the most recent interventions as vaccines, for example. And this is what we call patient-reported outcomes. And the clinical research that is the background of main interventions in health sector for medicines and also for medical devices, and for every intervention that we consider now in the conventional model of health sector. All this clinical research has been developed by some epidemiologic methods, designs, and they, for example, follow all the clinical research with this main data that conventionally we related it with the patient-reported outcomes as PROs. These patient-reported outcomes, they are defined as symptoms of illness or adverse effects of treatments. They have some discussion about how we get this information. They are multidimensional constructs, such as health-related quality of life. This is the most common tool, or health utility. And what they are, they try to bring functional outcomes, such as physical, sexual, also social, role, emotional, or cognitive functioning. That is the main outcomes in in clinical research. But the main concern of these patient-reported outcomes is that the result, for example, can be due to many things. And this is dealing with the designs that we applied in the clinical research area. So this kind of epidemiological designs, they have some kind of bias, because they only permit to relate one intervention, specific interventions, with 2 or 3 or 4 outcomes. But these outcomes can be also related with other main variables that we consider in these epidemiological designs. So I'm talking with you about these main concerns in the clinical research area, because they are also affected now our possibility to secure, to have the best interventions in health sector in general. These apply, for example, for medicines, for medical devices, and other kind of interventions. As you can check in this slide, we have too many concerns about these kind of tools. For example, the results are also probabilistic estimates, and this issue of the epidemiology, of the biostatistics, and how these probability estimates can be different. And this depends on the model, on the statistic model that we apply. Since the clinical research, this can be affected finally every possible new indication in the context of medicines, for example, or every risk condition for the whole population. We have many examples of clinical research data that, for example, this clinical research data, as well as they have this kind of patient report outcomes problems, they also have problems of bias publication, for example. Not all the security data of clinical research in pharmaceutical sector, it brings the whole scenario of the intervention. And for example, there are important initiatives to try to make more transparent this kind of information. We have many examples of how this kind of ethical behavior of the pharmaceutical industry finally affect with serious outcomes the new approvals, the new indications of medicines and other devices and interventions in health. So I'm talking with you about this issue because I guess that since many decades ago, since many years ago, we have other ethical concerns that make part of our currently scenario. These pros, these measures in health, in clinical research, and also in the post-marketing research, brings information, but also there is a whole scenario of information in the research scenario of a medicine or of a health intervention that we will be great to have this whole information from patients and from health professionals to take the better decisions in our health sector. And this is currently a big issue because we don't have these capabilities to aggregate the whole data of the security and also of the efficacy, effectiveness of our health interventions, and particularly our pharmaceutical interventions and other medical devices that we have now in different scenarios of application. As I told you, this is the most common tool that we apply to sorry for the Portuguese here in my slide, but I guess that this is the most common tool that we applied for follow these pros. And what happens with this kind of tools is that these main difficulties that we have in the clinical research and also in the post-marketing follow of any intervention in the health sector, I guess that there are main challenges that are linked with these previous concerns. The first one is that, for example, ethical issues about the patient data protection and about the follow of the pharmaceutical product use, or the follow of the post-marketing surveillance of medical devices. We have some regulation tools in most of our countries, but they are not linked with ethical issues. For example, in the pharmaceutical regulatory scenario, we have only ethical issues linked with the good clinical practices. This is a regulation that applies only for clinical research. But we don't have these ethical issues for other regulations that we have been applied 20 years ago. For example, pharmacovigilance, how we manage big data from the post-marketing scenario of any intervention. We don't have many regulation tools that allows us to follow these ethical concerns, and also this main target of our interventions in health. We consider that all the interventions, as well as medicines, as medical devices, as vaccines, or any intervention in the health sector they have to demonstrate efficacy, safety, and other main variables that we only can follow them in population in general. And this is all related with the ethical issues concerning patients, ethical issues concerning citizens in general, and it is the scenario. I guess that we have a great challenge with this regulation scenario. And the other main challenge is that this kind of regulation, for example, good clinical practices, is only applied for conventional medicines. We don't have, for example, good clinical practices with ethical issues applied for medical, the new possible technology that it is collecting now all the data of any patient. All the mobile applications that we have now, for example. And this is from other sectors that they don't have the health perspective. So there is a big issue here that the main agencies, as the EMA, the FDA, they are trying to have in mind some kind of ethical issues related with mobile devices, for example. But this is only the beginning of a hard work that we have here in the regulation scenario. The other thing is
Angela, that just would like to invite you to wrap up.
Okay. Okay, the other thing is that currently most of the patient data are collected by electronic devices. This is from the technology sector. This is not from the pharmaceutical sector, and we don't have enough regulatory tools for that. And with this, I think that the main question that we have now is what is happening with this kind of patient data protection and the technology sector, and which instance from the governments, from the authorities, health sector or joint sectors will be capable to have a surveillance on this new scenario. I have this slide just to provide you one of our concerns from the surveillance and the sanitary regulation. For example, in vaccines post-marketing surveillance, which which kind of information could we consider reliable information? We have a broad information on safety and surveillance of vaccines administration, but how we are managing this kind of information, it's a big question now. Which kind of sources can we consider trusted sources? This is another question that is still as in a big in a big doubt. And finally, I try to resume here which is the main issues about this pharmaceutical sector and patient data protection that concerns or also with other scenarios. The first scenario is the research scenario. That's the argument to share with you the pros and how they have many concerns about the construction of clinical research. The other great issue is the regulatory scenario. We have few tools for ethical protection and also for ethical protection for patient data protection. The other concern is that we are not talking about pharmaceutical sector. We are talking about other sectors that they are not really taken into account from the perspective of health sector. And the final area that I guess that it is one of the main areas that we have to work hard is the marketing surveillance from health perspective of these new technologies, mobile applications, and things like that. With this, I hope to bring some main issues for our panel. And thank you so much. I enjoy too much to be here sharing with you this kind of concerns that we have now from the health sanitary perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Angela, for all your inputs to this debate. I'm sure that this is also gonna suscitate a lot of questions.
Okay.
I'll start by one of them. In your opinion, do you think that real-world data could be used as evidence for marketing approval of new health technologies?
Sorry, could you repeat me the question?
Yeah, do you think that real-world data could be used as evidence for the marketing approval of new health technologies?
We are also using this kind of real-world data, real-world evidence. And I guess that we have a challenge on that. This is a new issue. And what happens with this kind of data is that it is always presented as aggregate data, population data. But it is so difficult to bring the previous steps and to get information, the reliable information from individuals, from person to person, because this is one of the transparent issues in the clinical research area, is that we have to get access to every individual data. And with these new approaches, we don't have this possibility. This is the main concern about that. We are applying that. We are applying that in many, the main authority references that we have here in our countries, as FDA, EMA, and other sanitary agencies. They are applying this kind of research outcomes, but the big question of these research outcomes is how we get the individual data, how we get the reliable information that provide us the security that we have to have in the ethical dimension of the clinical research. We don't have answer for that.
Thanks a lot, Angela. Let me just pose to you one more question before we'll come back to the whole group with a few questions to gather jointly your quick responses, but that might complement each other. So this one is specifically to the very interesting point you made about data being collected via new means, including apps, and that. And there's a question with regards to, there's been research as well. For example, it's noted by Deborah Lupton and Fernando Bruno, but you made this point as well, that there's a certain, gray area in mobile applications and other technologies and what they're doing, and that they don't explicitly present themselves as digital health technologies per se. And that's partly what is part of this problem. And by calling themselves well-being or something so forth, then they're escaping regulation. So you mentioned there's a lacuna on the one hand of regulation per se of the area, but other one might be that they might know about the regulations and they're purposely trying to escape. Can you comment a little bit more on this, please?
Of course, I have a last slide that I forget to share with you, and it is concerned with this question that you are providing me. I guess that this is a scenario that perhaps it's every effort that we are taking into account now from the sanitary perspective it is not enough, because the big universe and of the mobile applications of technology and digitalization of also from the health information area, we don't have now the enough capacity from the health perspective to recognize it. For example, just for mention and share with you one current situation. I don't know if you talk about in this panel about IQVIA. IQVIA is the big provider for the pharmaceutical industry and for other medical devices industry to collect all the information, the whole information since the clinical research phases until the post-marketing data that they get from patients. And this information, for example, they have some critical issues about, for example, they don't share this whole information with main authorities. IQVIA have confidential policies, and they don't share this kind of information with FDA, for example, or with EMA. So the argument of this IQVIA and the argument from other sectors, technology sectors, is that they are not related with the health sector as main actors. They are not pharmaceutical industry, they are not health providers, so they don't have to be they don't have this kind of to compliance, this kind of requirements. And we are now, this is the picture of our currently moment, I guess.
Thanks, Angela. That's very well said. Now, I'd like to invite back our panelists here, sort of a virtual roundtable, just as we will be then closing. I think there's a few questions that had been posed that generally apply across the board to a lot of the comments that you were saying. One of them is really a critical issue that we always talk about in health, which is we have structural inequalities. And so in this context, when we add what is happening with digitalization, it's not just about, what are the rules of the game for accessing data, but even when you have potential access is not the gap on data, who can actually utilize this effectively? So even when we have large data collections, it's not enough to just have access, but what do we do with this? Do we have that knowledge to turn that into substantial new research and development? So when we think about a transnational pharmaceutical firm, they really have the forehand in that skill. And then when you look at the individual and thinking about their own healthcare situation, potentially that's why some of these mobile apps and others are actually calling more to them, because it's something that seems more accessible. So this was a question that was raised about how, what are some ideas that you could share about how to deal with some of these structural inequities, thinking about digitalization in the health sector. I think some of you talked about communities, other about participation in government processes and lawmaking and so forth. But if you could just, in 1 minute maximum each, highlight again the point for these issue of structural inequalities. And I think the role of our governments in not being able to address those tensions of power. So I'll start off maybe the other way around. We last heard from Anita. If you'd like to start, Anita, then we go to Joyce and Angela. Please go ahead.
Sure, I'm happy to start. A wonderful question, and I think that a key issue about information systems and datafication is the centralization of power. And this is something that really doesn't require, in this day and age when platformization has been normalized, just as Joyce said, in a neoliberal sense, because the platform model could actually be organized to decentralize power, but the way the market actually has appropriated this network data model completely, obscures any other way to conduct, the business of data for social value. So in one sentence, I think if we are able to use data, epidemiological and clinical data, health-seeking behavior data, data from electronic records, data that concerns, for instance, information searches of consumers and patients, all this data in a way that can empower people in the public service delivery system, public health system at the edges, at the peripheries, people who are making decisions in rural health clinics, people who are making decisions as community health providers. If the power at the edges can actually be strengthened to perform a range of decisions, and if public health research systems can continue to work towards this, that will really be a question that is that answers the equity conundrum. And I will stop there, although I have another point I can come back if there's time.
Okay, let's come back to that. Joyce, you have the floor.
Acredito que nós precisamos olhar para a questão de classe social, especificamente na América Latina e no Brasil. Isso eu consigo falar com mais propriedade, claro, por ser meu objeto de estudo, e não desconsiderar a questão da classe social nas estruturas de poder que regulamentam o acesso a dados de saúde. Então, nós precisamos pensar em como trazer as classes sociais para debater e também participar de processos de regulamentação ao acesso dos dados e as estruturas de poder que se criam a partir dos dados, porque é com esta perspectiva que nós poderemos avançar para tirar estas estruturas de poder e permitir que os direitos humanos, no que tange o acesso irrestrito à área da saúde, ele realmente se faça presente. Enquanto as estruturas de poder estiver abarcada a classe social, e no caso do Brasil, as estruturas de gênero e raça, onde nós temos basicamente homens e brancos ditando regras e regulamentações, avançaremos muito pouco quando pensaremos no acesso igualitário à saúde, que seria um direito humano.
Great, thank you, Joyce. You have the floor now, Angela.
Thank you, Viviana. I guess that we forget the main ethical principles that we have since, I don't know, many years ago as a consensus. And I guess that perhaps they have to be involved with other political scenarios, with other technology sectors, for example. And I'm talking about justice, and I'm talking about I don't know how to say it in English. I will speak especially in Spanish. It is beneficencia. No? It is the basic principles that we have for clinical research, for health interventions use in general. And what we are confronting now is a scarcity scenario to keep in mind these kind of principles. As Joyce mentioned, they are part of human rights, and they are part of our social consensus that we have to keep in mind. It is a great challenge to explore how many other sectors with profit interest and with other targets, they are also always trying to maintain a great distance from their objectives and this kind of human rights and ethical principles. That's my concern, my main concern about. We can make too many health regulatory tools. We can have more research, protection in clinical research areas. But if we maintain this kind of interest that goes always far away from our other kind of interventions, will be always too difficult to have a more justice scenario in this area.
Thank you, Angela. So a quick last point to wrap up for each one of you. We talked about the healthcare sector and data. And we could potentially say that health data is different than other data. And we have seen some regulations saying, yes, we need to treat health data as a specific type of data. What do you think? Would you agree? Yes, we need to do that, particularly these aspects that you highlighted, or is this a cross-cutting issue? For example, when we look at the trade-off of the pharmaceutical industry and their role as private sector, we often see that the consumer or the users are not getting, let's say, the best part of the deal. And now when we see data, the benefits that come for research and development for new products, we do ask the question, will the consumer see, for example, significant price decreases or increased rights for their privacy? And we actually see that doesn't seem to be happening. Do you envisage we could, through health data specific regulation, have a better, let's say, sharing of the benefits between the parties? So quick last response, just generally on each one, and then we'll be wrapping up. So you have 1 minute. If there was something else on a key point you'd like to highlight, this would be the moment if you'd rather address that if you think it's well been said by someone else already. So Anita, for your last minute, please go ahead.
Yes, Viviana, I think that it's vital to actually have health sector regulation of data. And that's the step, as I pointed out, the EU is also taking with the common data space and its first set of rules for health. This is also because there is a adage, which says all data is health data. And I think it's a kind of an adage that is a truism. It's not, if you look at it, actually, even if I lift my finger or if I move my table or if, someone looks at my house, the size of the room could even be very critical to my mental health, right? So I think that it's vital to remember, therefore, that the definitions, classifications, categorizations, all of these are extremely important. Secondly, what I wanted to mention earlier was that we should really I mean, it's my feeling that we should not distinguish between who's collecting data now and whether the farmers are to blame or not. I agree that surveillance apparatuses, gadgets, and devices have become important, but the nature of the data market hides and obscures many data brokers and data players who are holding vast amounts of data from electronic records and other areas. So I would really think that we do need a comprehensive policy which does not distinguish between whether you're registered as a digital company on the platform marketplace or a health company. What we need is to look at different types of health data sets. So, I think that's really important.
Okay, that could spur another debate, but let's go ahead and try to see if we have some consensus or we leave this question for subsequent discussion. So Joyce, to you.
Com certeza daria um excelente debate. Eu concordo com a Anita de que nós precisamos pensar além das caixinhas de determinados temas. Recentemente eu escrevi um artigo falando sobre a coleta de dados do campo ao garfo, pois como a Anita coloca, muitas vezes no caso do Brasil você tem uma empresa que desenvolve agrotóxico e ao mesmo tempo ela desenvolve medicamento, ela faz parte de toda essa cadeia e o interesse no dado que está ali no campo, ao dado da compra que você realiza no mercado, ao dado do medicamento que você adquire, ele ganha um poder exponencial para além de uma única esfera, né? Então você pode avançar no tipo e na qualidade desse dado para a partir dele realizar novas construções e novos produtos. Então, eu acredito que pensar para além de especificidades da coleta de dados é fundamental para que exista uma regulamentação que, por vezes, que por vezes está restrita a determinados setores, mas que ela deveria ser muito ampla. Eu costumo sempre dizer a importância de mapear os atores que estão envolvidos em toda a cadeia relacionada a dados. Não só quem coleta, mas também quem guarda. Aqui no Brasil é muito comum, quando nós chegamos na ponta de quem guarda, esses dados nem estão no nosso país. Eles estão em outros territórios com acesso de pessoas das quais a gente não tem o menor conhecimento, nas famosas nuvens, né? Que estão bastante em alta em todo esse setor, em toda essa estrutura. Então, desenhar este cenário para regulamentar acima de determinadas categorias ou de determinados setores é fundamental para blindar cada vez mais a questão da privacidade e para que se desenvolva o uso de dados a favor e ao benefício da sociedade civil, e não somente a lucratividade de corporações que estão bastante envolvidas em todos esses processos.
Thank you, Joyce. Angela?
Thank you. I agree. I completely agree with Anita about health data sets. I guess that we have concrete scenario here for a focus on, because there are not many actors in this scenario now. And also, I agree that the most challenge of this emphasizes in health datasets, health data sets, will be the what we label as e-clouds, and the information that we have there. No, we can have now. We can recognize the limits about this information. We don't know how to make a first step, because we don't recognize it at all. So this, I agree with Joyce too in this kind of emphasis.
Thank you, Angela. So thank you, Joyce, Anita, and Angela for your great presentations. I think you've left a lot on the table for reflections. To the participants, thank you so much for joining us. Apologies if some questions aren't answered. I think there was another great one about to the extent that a rights-based model could be an alternative to a consent model, and how far can this, help protect the right to privacy and enhance data protection. So that very good for a subsequent session, because this won't be over. There will be 2 other days of sessions, as you know. So just to inform the participants and invite you again to come again in the next days. Great, it's up on the screen. You'll see that there are 2 subsequent sessions in the next 2 days that will address some of the questions you have asked, such as on artificial intelligence. And then in the next session, which is tomorrow, you will have much more discussion on related issues as well. So there's the program, and you have the links. Thank you so much, and thank you to the organizers again for setting this up. Real pleasure to have you all with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Viviana.
Thank you. Wonderful, ladies.
Bye.
Bye.